to present to you our course project proposal. Go ahead. So in this presentation, we're going to go over introduction, the problem, our why, our objectives, the preliminary literature review, our timeline and workload, and the conclusion and references. So our project is going to be based on the effect big data and social media has on national security. We just want to dive more into that topic. And the reason why we're doing this is these problems, well, mainly, about 25% of home invasions involve a trespasser that is able to see the victim's location on social media. Roughly 14% of respondents in a research that we found study dealt with unauthorized activity on their social media accounts within a lifetime. 14% may not seem like a lot, but if we're talking about our national security, there's roughly 320 million people, which is like 50 million people. That's 14%. So that's a lot of people that are having their accounts broken into. And lastly, $15 billion are lost by Americans annually due to identity theft. So pretty big deal.
All right, so touching on the significance of our topic and why we chose it. The reason why we decided on this topic is due to the importance and overall impact it has on a large amount of the American population. Social media is widely integrated in our lives and we don't realize it, but over 80% of the US utilizes social media. So a lot of us are tapping into those platforms. Through more extensive research, me and my group wanted to further examine how much our national security is influenced by the market and the overall vulnerability of our personal data. Next slide. Okay, so objectives. Our objectives that we decided upon that fit underneath our project topic include the selling of private information. So essentially looking into how exactly private parties are obtaining this personal information and in what ways they're benefiting from it. Location tracking, so seeing how users are secretly being tracked on social medias and why this is a concern, as well as account security. So this will dive more into the specific tactics that hackers are using to gain access to our accounts. Next slide. So my topic, selling private information, I'm going to be touching on how big data is stored through social media and ways that companies and individuals can acquire your personal information to sell. So looking at email tracking is known to essentially notify you when a person has opened or clicked on an email that you've sent. Email tracking software involves a process that'll place an invisible image pixel in your email. And this is able to detect the exact time as well as the date it's been viewed by a recipient. Point of sale software commonly used for business transactions. However, POS vulnerabilities and malware allow cyber criminals to steal your credit card details, information, and clone terminals and commit other forms of financial fraud that don't just affect the buyer, but as also the retailer. Server farms used by social media platforms to store their consumer data. If a server in a server farm is compromised, attackers can use those servers to attack other servers, and cyber criminals can also use social engineering to gain access to the physical location of these server sites. Cookies, specifically those relating to social media, are used to store your preferences and account details when using social media platforms. And they can track any kind of data about users, such as your search browser history, what websites you've accessed, your IP address, and any on-site behavior. Hackers can also steal cookies from browsers to hijack your accounts and perform identity theft. Next.
All right, so in this project, I'm going to be focusing on the topic of location tracking. Okay, good, I'm not muted. Social media is one of the first things I'm going to dive into. It's a post that can be tracked to the location they were taken. So not only the physical location from the phone, but if the photo or the video was analyzed, that could pose a threat. Military privacy, this is information that can expose military positioning or plans. So an example of this is back in when Ukraine versus Russia first broke out. We were seeing a lot of posts on TikTok or Instagram of soldiers marching in formation and whatnot. And so those videos can be taken into account. Next one is location trends. So this is mapping out consistently visited locations. So if we had a person of power that for some reason was unsecure and had their phone pinging while they were moving around to different locations, someone can analyze that data and create like a trend, basically. Triangulation is the last one, and this is, I don't know too much about this, and that's why I want to look into it. It's basically intercepting satellite signals to pinpoint a location.
Alrighty, so I'm next. The subtopic that I'm going to be focusing on in my research is account security. And since this is a literature review and not really a research paper, my plan is to go into like a deep dive on the different types of hacking techniques with more of a focus on like how they actually happen. Because our understanding is, as a group, if we better understand how these attacks occur from a more technical perspective, it'll make it easier to determine the scope of their effects in terms of national security. Should give us a more accurate view of the actual amount of damage that they have on both personal and national security as a whole. The 4 hacking techniques I chose to focus on, although I'm going to try to research more if I can, are man-in-the-middle attacks, phishing attacks, keylogging, and viruses and Trojans. And the reason I chose those 4 attacks is they cover a broad spectrum of techniques, of hacking techniques, which will allow me to research a larger variety of concepts related to this class. Next, we have our schedule. So week 1, which should be July 4th to July 10th, is just going to be all of our independent research. So just us going in Google Scholar or whatever other website we need to use and finding peer-reviewed articles that we can use for references for our literature review. Week 2, which should be July 11th through the 17th, all of our references need to be finalized, and we're all going to submit to each other by the end of the week our own personal draft summaries for each of the subtopics that we've completed. Week 3, which should be July 18th to July 24th, we're going to create a PowerPoint draft, just like the bare bones, and just brain dump all of the information we have onto it to try to figure out what kind of structure we want to implement. And then we're going to finalize our literature review paper. Week 4, which should be July 25th to the 31st. We're going to finalize our PowerPoint, clean it up, make it look pretty. We're going to submit our literature review, and then we're going to probably get together as a group 1 or 2 times and actually rehearse our presentation before we actually present on week 5. Which should be the first week of August. Workload. So I'm not going to spend long on this slide. And to be honest, we only really added it because we thought the graphic looked cool. But with that being said, it does kind of double as a way to drive home the point that we're going to be splitting the workload fairly between all of us and making it a point to collaborate and work together as a team throughout the entire project. All right, lastly, in conclusion, our goal is to perform a comprehensive literature review over the 3 stated topics. Sierra's going to be researching selling private information for location tracking. Ethan's going to be researching that. For account security, I'll be researching that. And our goal of this paper is pretty much, it's not only to inform ourselves, but also the general public about the dangers that social media actually presents. And since most people, at least in regards to this topic, don't believe that their individual actions have impacts on a larger scale, our paper is going to hopefully help them make the connection that their personal security, while it seems separate, actually plays a larger role in our national security. And then these are our references. And we're open to questions.
Hey, first of all, guys, great job. Got a little bit of feedback here, sorry. Great job, Ethan, Sierra, and Lauren. Really appreciate the work that went into that, because of course we all in this particular group topic research the same thing. And I guess I have the same question for each of you. And I guess Ethan, you can start if you want, and then Sierra and Lauren, you can go next. What did you find most striking as far as security risks and privacy risks in the different areas you researched? Ethan, if you want to start.
Well, so I haven't gone too deep into it since it's just the project proposal. I wanted to just get an idea of what I was going to be researching, but the most surprising thing was actually the amount of people that are unaware of how much they're being tracked, and then the monetary value of that, not only on like on our economy and whatnot, but underneath the table and whatnot. So people don't realize that they could be being tracked. And then that at a larger scale, like our whole nation, is massive, and it's a big problem.
So you're saying that most people are unaware of the amount of data and amount of
Exactly.
information they're letting people take from them on a daily basis.
Exactly. And one of those things is their location. And so I'd like to dive into the different ways that it's being tracked through different, and how it can be used once that information has been received.
Great, thank you. That's really important stuff.
I've got a quick question. Unless I misinterpreted something, what would, in y'all's opinion in researching this topic, be a solution to people's position being tracked, especially based on social media, where part of the appeal is showing location? Or even as a sidebar, like the people in Ukraine thing, like noting location based upon like figures in the background. How would a solution to that even arise besides just like doing what we're doing in a Zoom call and just sort of blurring out the background, really?
I think the best way to counteract it, at least on the level of knowledge I have right now, since we haven't delved more into the topic, is just going to be general like awareness in the public. I don't think people really think about the fact that they're constantly being tracked and their location is being tracked. I think there's like a million pages of terms and conditions in every single social media platform that you go on, and no one reads them, and they don't know how much of their data is actually being taken. So I think just delving into the topic to find a more technical answer, which I don't have for you right now, but in terms of social, just increasing awareness.
All right, thank you.
I guess I do have a question. So there's a lot of people here who are like already on social media and stuff. So what is, in your guys' opinions, like some good ways to like prevent that kind of theft from occurring now? Like, what are some things we can do now to sort of help secure ourselves and our data?
I'd say just from like an individual perspective, be careful what you're posting on social media to start with. A lot of people, like we've mentioned, aren't aware of how public what we're putting out there is. So just like being more aware as a person, like, okay, I shouldn't be posting this, or like I shouldn't be revealing this information, especially if you're affiliated with like military or a specific company, or if you have like an important job or a role in the government. I'd say as like a community as a whole, I don't know, it's kind of tricky, but that's how I would answer it from like an individual perspective.
So if I can add one thing you can do, and this is more on Sierra's topic of selling information, but all of us basically have, well, I do at least, have like 1 or 2 passwords for everything. So someone can easily get that through your social media account and then make an assumption that that's probably also your password for something else. And that something else may be connected to a credit card. So step 1 right now in our proposal is change your passwords or make them super hard to guess.
That's yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
I had a question for you guys. Will you guys cover the subject of foreign countries harvesting data from other countries?
I can take that one. That's actually one of the main things we definitely wanted to research. We all kind of have an involvement with the military. We're in ROTC, and so we talk about that a lot in a lot of our classes. So the idea of like other countries being able to infiltrate our own is kind of what drove our decision to go with national security instead of personal security for our topic. So that's definitely something we're going to delve into.
Going off of that, do you guys know like how many attacks are like there for national level?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
I said, do you guys know about how many attacks are there like on a national level? Just a random question.
No, you're fine. When you say national level, do you mean the nation as a whole, or?
Yeah, nation as a whole.
So that's kind of hard to quantify. I mean, someone probably did it and we can definitely research that. But I don't know how to give an answer right at this moment.
And then I know you guys say you guys are doing the literature review paper. I'm just curious, like, how you guys structuring it? You guys like actually talk about it.
So I was actually going to ask the professor this. I'm not entirely sure what literature review entails based on the slides that we see that are posted. So we got to figure out what that is. We're definitely going to be reading a lot of literature and reviewing. So I'm going to go off of that right now.
So I think we've had about 5 minutes of Q&A. Were there any other questions, or would you like to conclude?
Awesome. Thank you guys for your time.
Great, thank you. You guys did a great job.
Nice job, you guys.
So who wants to go next?
I think contingency planners were up next.
Okay,
All right, so let's share the screen.
okay, we're recording.
All right. So our project proposal is cyber attacks and how they're wreaking havoc on energy companies, in particular, fossil fuel companies. Yeah. So the motivation for why we chose this topic has become because cyber attacks are becoming more frequent and disruptive. Just to put it into perspective, this year alone in 2022, so far 21 energy companies have been attacked or attempted to be attacked. So, and we're halfway through the year. America's outdated energy systems are extremely vulnerable. So almost 61% of our energy comes from fossil fuels. So that's a lot of companies that are dealing with that, and a lot of companies that are particularly vulnerable. The energy industry was the third most targeted sector for cyber attacks. And back in 2019, they were actually 9th. So in a 2 to 3 year span, they've gone from being 9th place towards 3rd place. And that's only behind financial and business sectors. So huge increase. Gas and oil industries are targeted the most. Electrical companies in particular tend to have a little bit more security to stop cyber attacks. Gas and oil are kind of a little behind them for multiple reasons that we'll cover later on. And then this problem is not just a national problem, it's also a global problem. You know, you see attacks that happen in Ukraine, Europe, Saudi Arabia, Norway, Iran, and just to give an example of Brazil, an attack happened at their oil company that over 1,000 gigabytes worth of data was stolen. So it's a very large problem. So effects of these attacks, you know, why should you be concerned about this? You know, it's not just the companies that are being attacked and, you know, having to deal with it. It's also consumers as well. So if you remember in 2021, the Colonial Pipeline attack that happened, it's the largest fuel pipeline in the US, and they had to shut it down for close to a week just to resolve that problem. They had over 100 gigabytes worth of data that was stolen. And just for those 6 days of it being shut down, over 15 million barrels weren't transported to consumers throughout the US. Outside of the US, in 2015, a power grid attack occurred in Ukraine that left over 225,000 people without power for hours. And what made this worse was it was in the heart of winter. So needless to say, it was a little bit more difficult for them to endure. The most recent attack that happened stateside was a Colorado energy company. Hackers gained access to over 25 years worth of historical data and erased all of it. So the company was a little bit crippled as far as consumer information, historical data, and et cetera. And then another most recent attack that's not listed on here was actually most recently during the Ukraine war. Hackers attempted to attack an electrical company and almost succeeded in crippling their entire system, which would have affected over 2 million people. So, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ian right now.
So, hi guys, I'm Ian, and I'm also a part of this group, and I just gonna explain why the importance of our topic. So, our literature reviews relevance kind of emphasizes how crucial energy infrastructure is to modern civilization. Cyber attack prevention is a crucial challenge, albeit the undertaking is pretty difficult to execute. The oil gas sector is well behind other industries when it comes to being digitally enabled. Many of these industries use outdated software, as Eric mentioned, and common outcomes of using this outdated technology are missing data, poor data quality, and transmission of that data, lack of consistency in formatting and tools, as well as confusion related to inspections, audits, and workflows where employees are needed for overtime due to these inefficiencies. As of today, there are no specific cybersecurity requirements for oil and natural gas pipelines or other portions of the nation's oil and natural gas infrastructure. Security updates are not required, but optional for oil and gas companies. This is per the TSA, which has overseen cybersecurity for the oil and natural gas industries since the agency was created back in 2001. To date, the TSA has taken a voluntary compliance approach. And to add on to that, better technology is making outdated air gapping techniques obsolete. And just to give context on what air gapping is air gapping is a security measure that involves isolating a computer or network and preventing it from establishing an external connection. Energy companies would air gap their operational systems that run pipelines and power plants as a method of cyber attack prevention. But these companies are now transitioning to like monitoring and diagnostic software, which are, as you know, prone to cyber attacks. Also, due to the decentralized nature of energy company operations, cybersecurity teams in these energy companies have to defend large distributed attack services, and the lack of data to these breaches prevents these companies from making informed cybersecurity investment decisions. Next slide. So to all these relevancies that I've mentioned, honestly, we plan to investigate ongoing improvements and solutions or methods in which the fossil fuel industry can combat these cyber attacks. This is a literature review, but the goal is to conduct research in order to identify areas where these businesses could strengthen the cyber attack defenses. For example, to prevent things like a single point failure in any one technology or protection strategy, the emphasis is to use various overlapping and mutually supportive defensive mechanisms, like the implementation of firewalls, gateway antiviruses, intrusion protection systems, and online security gateway solutions across the network, which would all fall under these categories. And we would also describe the methods most frequently used by hackers to access these systems. Just to also give more context, nation state attackers may deliberately target energy businesses in order to harm crucial infrastructure and levels of the economy, politics, and society. Hackers may also assume that energy businesses are more inclined to pay a ransom to prevent supply or operational disruption. They can use things like ransomware or malware that would reprogram the industrial controls and safety systems. And then also our third topic would also be examining the challenges that energy businesses are having updating their cybersecurity defense systems. Among the difficulties mentioned, these include the unwillingness of companies to go down for long periods of time, the absence of political pressure to upgrade these systems, as well as the interference of political interests in cybersecurity advancements. Just to give an example, Senator Rick Scott objected the bipartisan cyber incident notification bill in danger of not being included, or was in danger of not being included in the NDAA, because Scott was worried that small businesses may be burdened by the duty to report cyber incidents. So it just never made it into the bill. And now I'm going to pass it over to Brianna.
Okay, hi, I'm Brianna. So for our preliminary literature review, understanding the scale of the problem, in 2021, 4.2 trillion kilowatt hours were generated in electrical utility facilities across the US. High potential for this problem to affect millions of Americans. Occurrences of cyber attacks In 2021, ransomware attack on the Colonial pipeline, like Eric mentioned earlier, it shut down over 5,500 miles of pipeline as a precaution. Customers caused thousands of gas stations to run out of fuel. You guys are feeling it right now. The gas price is going up. Like, imagine going to the gas station and there's just no gas for you. Obviously, that just affects everyone in the country. And then that example in Ukraine, just to show that this is a global issue. It's not just our country. They had that power grid shut down. It was the first intentional blackout triggered by cyber attack. And I think Eric mentioned earlier that it was during the winter time, so that, hard for them to deal with. And for warning signs of vulnerable systems, many fossil fuel companies rely on old control systems. That's pretty self-explanatory. When you have control systems that are out of date, hackers are going to try to find newer ways of getting in there and getting whatever information or anything that they need. The energy industry was the third most attacked sector in 2020. Next slide, please. So for our timeline, we've had a couple weeks for the group formation and the proposal of this. For the next few weeks, we're going to work on outlining and finalizing our literature review and presentation. And then in the last week, first week of August, we're going to be presenting. So we split it up into the 3 focus areas that Ian was mentioning. Ian's going to be focusing on the types of methods in which breaches in energy companies occur. How are people attacking? Why are they attacking? What are they trying to get? Eric is going to be focusing on the obstacles companies are facing, trying to combat this and what kind of hurdles they're experiencing. And I'm going to be focusing on possible improvements in cybersecurity, what's been done to try to increase security and what can be done in the future. Summary, our main focus is to address the current problems that the fossil fuel energy sector is facing and develop a potential solution to these problems. 61% of America's energy does come from fossil fuels, so that's kind of a big target. It's kind of unfortunate that we put, for lack of a better term, all of our eggs into one basket, because that's just like one giant target. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. And here are some of our references. Do you have any questions?
Great job again, guys. Really very impressive. Do you, I'm curious what was of greatest concern in terms of the immediate future and what we might face in terms of liability for energy or compromise of security?
I think the biggest problem is what we're seeing in Ukraine and how it's consistently affecting us, whether we hear about it or not. Russia in particular is constantly the culprit, or that I should say the major culprit, for attacking our infrastructure. And so far, there hasn't been anything as severely crippling. I think, like I said earlier, the most was the Colonial Pipeline, but with an aging and outdated energy infrastructure, in particular to the largest production of energy in this country, all it takes is one company to get through and go down, and we don't have electricity for how many days, weeks, or months. And that doesn't just affect our personal lives, it affects national defense, some other sort of like social source or business that we're used to, not being able to have going forward.
Eric,
sorry.
I'm just curious, Eric, you made one comment. I know that the question of Russian involvement in cyber attacks has been both a political question and also one of interest to experts in cybersecurity. Were you able to find any good resources to substantiate a lot of the rhetoric we hear in the news every day about Russia being the primary culprit of cyber attacks?
So the most I found is they actually discovered who the attackers were for the Colonial Pipeline. They were able to trace it back to a specific group. That group is based out of Russia, and the FBI and their cybersecurity team were actually able to recover some of the money that was paid to the company that held the data as hostage, if you will. So a constant thing that I found, and this will be included more so on research, just because, you know, it is a political topic as much as it is a cyber security issue, is they're constantly tracing IP addresses back to Russia that are scanning these companies, and they're scanning just to see how secure their software is, their internet connections, their networks, and then a lot of the scans that they're tracing back are being traced back to Russia. I haven't done enough research to figure out if they're using, you know, faulty servers or if they're bouncing off different connections or whatnot. But the sources that I have read were from the FBI, so I'd assume they know kind of what they're looking for a little bit. But I look forward to researching that and giving you a more definitive answer in our final presentation.
Thank you, Eric. Ian, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
So it's all good. I kind of wanted to go back to that initial question that you asked, David, about like something we would have to be like concerned about maybe in the future. So aside from the political issues that the world goes through, which we will cover, and it's something we're going to have to like put more research into, I'd also say emergent technologies are switching to like renewable sources of energy. Sure, they're there and they're not really going to take over the fossil fuel industry overnight, and it's just going to take a decent amount of time. But I'm interested in looking into like with those cyber attacks, focusing on like how they're doing and how they're done. I'm also interested in looking like outcomes for like how these new emergent technologies like solar, wind, water, how these companies are going to try to already have these cybersecurity systems in place, like once they start. Because when I was reading, I don't know where I read it from, I don't know, like I was talking to my group mates yesterday. It was some quote that that cybersecurity defenses have to be right 100% of the time, whereas the attacker only has to be right once, right? So the surface area where these companies are at, specifically fossil fuel companies are at, they're continuously spreading. So they're like still using old, outdated technology, but also trying to incorporate this new emergent technology to better make their systems more efficient. So the surface area keeps spreading, so they're more prone and vulnerable to attack. But yeah, it to me, I think it's more like a decision or concern of time and how long it would take to really.
Thank you, Ian. And I don't want to be a question hog, so Brianna, I'd love to hear what you have to say, but I will let other people ask questions.
I've got one before we move. I don't know if that was a question posed on that, but I just have a general question before we move on. What could you paint me a picture of just like a standard what they actually do in a cyber attack on, like, say, a power company? Like, what would they shut down? Just like, for example, to like conceptualize what they're holding hostage.
So from what I've read, I've seen, or like the most common occurrence from what I've seen, because this is more like newspapers and blog posts, I'm still looking for the information in like a scientific journal or an article, is they target like safety management systems. This is not quite related to like fossil fuel industry, but like an energy utility source was the water. I forgot what chemical it was, but the water in Tampa was tampered with. I don't know how long ago, maybe less than a year ago or more than a year ago. And all it took was a hacker to go in, get lucky with a password or something like that. And they just increased the amount of the chemical used in the filtration system to like make the water not like good for human life. So that's kind of one instance that I can think of right now, but for sure I'll definitely look into that, because that's more my kind of area of like how it happens, what they do, and how they dive in.
Great.
Cool, thank you.
I think we're just about at 5 minutes. I don't know if you want to move on or if there's anything else you'd like to add, guys.
I was just going to add to that real quick, just give a more definitive answer. So the reason why the pipeline for the Colonial Pipeline got shut down was out of a precaution. So when the hackers stole the information, they stole it from a third-party company that was attached to the national corporation. And there was fear that the information that they stole was going to lead them to a back door into the larger network of the company, which at that point, if they do gain access to that, they could have actually shut down or caused physical damage to the pipeline, which would have caused more of a disruption, more cost, and more of a negative outcome. So they shut it down as a precaution. But that's something that if they were to got a hold of, could have been a lot more dire than the 6 days without that pipeline being running.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Great job, guys. Really appreciate it. Very informative. Just as an FYI, there's 2 of us here at the same location recording all of this. And we have a lightning storm right now. So if we drop out, we have a backup generator, we'll go back in, but I don't know if anyone else is recording except us 2. So if we drop out, Levi and I, then if no one else can record, you might want to wait till we log back in.
I'm recording too.
Sure, awesome.
Very good, that's great.
All right, up next is my group, Team Evil. Let's see, share screen. Perfect.
All right, let's start. Hello, everyone. Today we will be presenting the use of user data collection in marketing and how it does affect the businesses and customers. Next slide, go ahead. All right, so for many companies, consumer data offers a way better understand and meet their consumer demands by analyzing customer behavior, as well as vast troves of reviews and feedback. Companies can natively modify their digital presence, goods, and or services to better suit the current marketplace. Also, companies collect your data in order to build up your profile, which can be used to push to targeted products and services. This has become big business now, as customers are willing to pay a lot of money for such data, which can help them target specific segments of the market. Another thing I wanted to point out, if you go to the next slide, is the internal and external data. Internal data is like, and what's the difference between them? Internal data is information generated from within the business, covering areas such as operation, maintenance, personnel, and finance, which is external data comes from the market, including customers and competitors. It's things like statistics from surveys, questions, research, and customer feedback. And I'll give it to Daniel from here.
All right, thank you. Before we get into more information on this topic, I'd like to outline some of the quote unquote problems. They're not necessarily things that have to be like overcome in a specific way, but just information that is relevant to understand the concepts. Previously, a fellow group mentioned similar stuff along the lines of what we're doing since we're dealing with data. So there's going to be a little bit of overlap, but generally there's feelings of varied opinions of having personal data being collected and distributed for profit, and that sort of dependency on opinions of that type depends. Wow, I'm using depend a lot. I found an article that shows the difference in opinions varying between different groups of people, and also the knowledge gained, or the knowledge of how much information is being gleaned off of them. As well, there's also security concerns of if they're gathering this much personal data that I don't know about, what happens if there's a security breach? Do other people find out my personal browsing, like preferences, or the way that I'm being targeted with ads, sort of informational data, how they've sort of built up your own almost personality from the ground up of what you'd like being leaked to other people could be detrimental to personal privacy. Also, there's the problem of profiting on data collection of users. Some users may not want to be profited off of their information. We'll touch on that a little bit later. Also, the effectiveness of using targeted ads for purchases. There's also another study that I found that has to deal with how the targeted ads, although they are intrusive upon you, can be incredibly helpful and have links to purchase percentage. Otherwise, they wouldn't be using them, of course, but that'll be something we'll touch on a little bit later. Also, in addition to the problems faced, just general significance is individuals generally value the privacy of their personal information. However, an individual may be more open and accepting of data collection for, you know, personal ads and it being an actually good way to gain new products and insights into your browsing data and preferences. But even those people might still be worried about leakage of data. Also, the effects on ads and user experience, the effectivity of that. Generally, the objectives of what we're trying to reach in this project of our literature review is to outline the user perception of data collection, explain the importance of security of keeping personal data collection private, also to underline the methodologies in targeting individuals using collected data. So that sort of generally applies to how this data that is collected based on your browsing history or browsing preferences is used to shape how things are presented to you on the internet. Moving forward.
All right, my name is Juan, and this one's gonna be my topic. So the perspective that I wanted to take on this topic was the more of the financial side that we get from targeting ads, and I wanted to dive in deeper on it and kind of extract more of like the benefits that these companies are getting, such as the money that companies are paying and receiving from selling and buying data. And what I found in some of my research was that these companies, the companies that are selling data from a single person for like cents. So when the companies that are buying, they're buying in bulk, and they're only allowed to buy in bulk. You cannot just buy a single person's data for like a couple cents. And I want to talk about the connotation that it has with the data that they buy, because every time that we hear about these targeted ads and about how it's supposed to be like a privacy issue, I think that it has a negative connotation, and I think that is different. The only reason that we see it like that, it's because we may think that these companies are sketchy. And in my research, I also found that some people are actually okay with this when they actually find out what they are giving to these companies. But at the same time, these people think it's sketchy because they're not sure how worth their data is. So I want to talk more about those financial problems that we may see in this, and have a deeper insight on how the customer may feel and how these companies use this data for their own purposes.
I, of course, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be mostly focusing on user perception of data collection. Everyone, of course, has an anecdotal story they might have heard where it's like, hey, I was just talking about buying cat food, and now suddenly my phone gives me, ads for cat food. I didn't type anything on Google. So there's some user perception issues that are a disconnect that sort of informs how people think about the usage of data collection and its use in development of ads and other software. However, I also wanted to talk more on differences between different groups and their openness to share data as well. I've already found, for example, in one of the articles I found, it showed that in general of surveyed people involved, women are more open to having their data be used for targeted ads than men. And there's other sort of interesting little subjects that there's differences, or like how many hours a day you spend on a phone. And then also perception of data breaches of the like, and how that's supposed to be kept safe, because this is also data and security as a topic.
All right, and my main focus is going to be about the differences between quantitative and qualitative data. So quantitative data is number-based, countable or measurable, also tells us like how much, how many, how often in calculations, while qualitative data is interception-based, descriptive, and relating to language, also can help us to understand why, how, or what happened behind certain behaviors. Next slide.
All right, so this is gonna be our schedule, like everybody else, you know, week one is gonna be our research material that we're actually already working on. Then we're gonna do our first draft. We'll see how the professor is gonna want us to go about that. Then the second draft. Then we're gonna make the presentation. I believe it's gonna be just like this, but with more of like a deeper insight in our topic. And instead of just presenting ideas, we're gonna like expand into what we have to say and actually cite sources maybe and come up with solutions and more questions that we may have, and then presentation, and finally the report and the submission to the class. All right, so the concluding remarks is that our aim is to more of like have a more like informative topic and do a deep research for the use of the data that these companies are collecting, and how this collecting of data might not be as bad as we think it is, and it can be used in a positive way that can benefit both the companies and the users, and how it can improve the quality of our life. And I think that can be achieved by knowing every perspective of how these companies are doing this, how they're benefiting from this, and how much we are getting also from that, because sometimes it feels like we are the product, and that may not be as ethical from a company. So I think we should have more, like these companies should have more of a transparent way to show how they're doing this. And I think that's how we want to do this research, with all this perspective in mind. And then these are our references. Of course, we'll be adding more possibly for our research, but this is what we have for now and the proposal.
All right, questions? Sorry, I stumbled a bit over my words halfway through there, but I was just trying to get a couple ideas out.
You're
I have a
good. Yeah, I
question.
have a, oh, go ahead.
So for data collection, do you think that a more like realistic solution to solving the problem for those that maybe are more private and don't want their data collected would be like an increase in government regulation? Or do you think it would be an increase in security on individuals' actual personal devices?
That's a hard question to answer objectively. I personally do not like just government regulation just happen all the time. So it's a hard thing where it's like, I think a good solution to that is a large amount of people who are open, fully knowing and being aware of the information that they are selling, can give their information to allow for a better user experience for a collection of people. And the people who sort of don't like selling their information can sort of piggyback, the smaller like minority of people can piggyback off of the data collected off of other people. I think is a safe, but it could be developed in other ways. Regulation could be a good way in doing that if it gets out of hand in certain ways, if collection is more than just browsing tendencies or the like.
Thank you.
So my group is somewhat similar to your guys' topic, and so this is a problem that we're going to have to deal with too. I just wanted to get some insight from you guys. How do you guys plan on steering away from the more social aspect of this and focus more on the technology that's involved with it and how it relates back to our course, our class?
Do one of you guys want to take that, or I can take it as well if you don't want to?
You can go ahead.
Okay. I think that it's very hard to separate this topic completely from its social aspects, because the whole point of, not the whole point, but it's in our title, is part of this is use of user data collection and marketing, and my subtopic is user perception, which you can quantify as an informational statistic that is not only a social commentary. And I'd like to channel perception more into understanding more, and sort of takes on how to improve that in the future. But I think it's really important to keep within this project an understanding of perception and opinion, as that is like a good portion, like up to a third of at least my section. But I agree. I like yours. You guys got your presentation up and I'm like, hey, that's kind of like ours.
Yeah.
But we're in different directions. So
Very well said. Thank you.
I had a question. So earlier, Juan, you said like you were talking about the worth of data. So let's say you're a company and you want to buy data. What attributes the worth to the data? Is it like the quantity or the sensitivity of it, or is it a mix of both?
It's actually a mix of both. So on my research, I was looking at some of the more data that may seem more like that reveals more from you is worth more than just like what your sets is or how like what your name is and whatever. Like the companies may also sell your email, which, you know, other companies that are buying may use to harass you with all this spam email, and therefore that's more of like something that is more relevant, and they actually pay way more than just for your name and stuff. And they also have to still buy in bulk, because even if it's more, like as I said during the presentation, the money that they're paying is still in the cents. But when it gets to like emails and stuff, it's like maybe like 80 cents per email, which is still not that much. But yeah.
Thanks.
if there's no further questions, we can leave it to the next group.
Thanks, guys. Great job.
Thank you. The next group was B team, I believe.
All right.
I like your theme.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name's Anna, and Mina is also my team, and Kyle. And our project proposal is about cyber attack prevention for big data centers. So next. So first of all, what are big data centers? So to start off simple, they're places that companies keep their like large amount of data at. They can be either in big office rooms or on the cloud. Going further, big data centers can also compute memory and processing powers to like keep the application running, and they store data and backup data as well, and they connect to other data centers to get information to the outside world as well. So they thrive by improving on their reliability, efficiency, and security. And we're focusing on the security aspect of it. And next.
All right, so let's talk about threats to security. Let's start with the quantity, availability, and sensitivity of data. Nowadays, people produce data like no other time in history. While I was doing some research, I read that we produce around 2.5 quintillion bytes per day. This data needs to be stored and processed in data centers. Data centers contain a lot of data that can need to be accessed at any given time. If for any reason hackers succeed in powering off a database, the data in that database center will be unavailable. This unavailability is also a big issue because data centers need to be available the most possible time. Data stored could be sensitive information that only the person or the company who stored it should see it. An external party should not get a hold of that data in any manner. And if they sadly do, it should be encrypted. But are the current encryption methods unbreakable? Moving on to hackers with malicious intents, also known as black hat hackers. They'll start cyber attacks on data centers. They're interested in stealing any sort of data for their own gains, like selling them to other parties or using them at their advantage, like blackmailing some people. Other sort of attacks could be modifying temperatures, turning off systems, generating false alarms, and more inside of the data centers. Another threat is the emergence of quantum computers. It's a big issue when it comes to the data at rest and the data in transition inside data centers. For the data at rest, symmetric key algorithms are used. multiple data centers like the ones Apple use for their iCloud server. They use AES 128, which will be a lot easier to brute force using quantum computers that use quantum algorithms. Additionally, for the data in transition, this type of data uses asymmetric algorithm, which is also at an even greater risk because they use TLS protocols like the widely used right now RSA, which can be cracked in a matter of minutes using a quantum algorithm. So your data in motion basically can be cracked in minutes using a quantum algorithm on a quantum computer. So yeah, quantum computers can help hackers decrypt data at rest and the data in transition easier using quantum algorithms on a quantum computer.
So why should we be concerned? With all the applications we use, we have data stored somewhere that we don't really exactly know where it is, and even though they are private data too as well. Thus, we want our data to be secured in big data centers, while like the hackers are out there like stealing data in there without like us even knowing about it. So we need to be aware of like identity theft, so it doesn't like happen to us. Furthermore, cybersecurity is like a popular topic nowadays. There are even like companies with their like main focus on defense and security, such as like Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman, that we might even want to work for someday. And next. As you can see in this graph, the attacks are like increasing a lot dramatically in the last few years. And you can see it's almost like a exponential like curve. And this is just for like the big attacks, like losing like over $1 million. Can you imagine like how many there are for small attacks we have nowadays? But if you have time, we can like probably show something related later. Next.
Okay, hi guys, I'm Kyle, and I will be talking about the current systems we have in place to sort of fight back against hackers. So as we were describing earlier, because securing our data is so important, info security has become incredibly sophisticated, especially in the past few years. So generally we can say that there are two sides to information security, as we're showing here. So on the one hand, we have software security, which is things like encryption and firewalls, which I think we're all pretty familiar with, but just so we're all on the same page, encryption is at its like bare bones is sort of scrambling a set of data using an encryption key. And then when we need the data, we can unscramble it using that key. And the key's access is exclusive between like the parties that are sending data and then the party that is receiving the data. So in general, it just keeps the data between those two people and those two people only. And then we also have firewalls, which I think everyone has on like their routers and stuff. It basically it monitors any traffic, and if it sees that that traffic is unauthorized and tries to like intercept the data that's being passed, then it blocks that data. So on the other hand, we have the human element of information security. Generally, at its most basic level, information security involving the human side is just social engineering awareness. So, you know, if you have like a job or something, especially if it involves like infotech, they usually put you through training that teaches you like how to be aware of things like phishing, which is emails that are like sent out, you know, in mass that try to get you to click a link or something and download something malicious that can be used to get into the systems that you work with, which can then go on to do incredible amounts of damage, which can cost like millions and millions of dollars. And on top of that, we have things like a zero trust policy. So like some companies, they just consider everything outside of their sphere of influence to be just like completely untrustworthy. So everything needs to be like constantly validated while it's in their systems. And generally it's just a way to be thorough so that nothing slips through cracks. So next slide, please. So our info security is not going to be trustworthy forever. Social engineering and computer engineering are both evolving as info security, continues to be worked on. So as Mina was talking about earlier, quantum computers are going to become a thing in as soon as like the next few decades. So when we look at encryption, it's usually considered like the last line of defense for our systems. And the only thing that prohibits people from getting through that is the fact that computers do not have the processing power to run through all the possible variations of an encryption key. Quantum computers, as they evolve, they can get through that in a matter of days or even hours. So that's something that we really need to be wary of as time goes on. And on top of that, to make things even worse, social engineering is becoming more sophisticated every single day. So we've seen instances of things like spear phishing, which is personalized attacks, which use spoofing to generate emails that look incredibly similar to like intranet emails. If you work somewhere like in an office and sending, correspondence between two employees or like HR notices and stuff, hackers can make emails that are almost identical to those correspondences. So it makes it even harder to tell whether or not what you're clicking on is actually a virus. And on top of spear phishing, we have things like, the term whaling, where VIPs and like company executives or heads of HR are targeted. So, important key players in companies that if they're compromised, then the whole thing trickles down and it, can ruin the entire system. So next slide, please.
All right, moving on to the proposed solutions we want to look into. The first solution we want to analyze is to force multi-factor authentication. MFA is still in some cases recommended, but not always mandatory. This makes accounts that can access any information or features of the data center unsecure. I was reading researchers at a security firm called Cybele. They found around 20,000 poorly protected data centers. They were able to extract the passwords of accounts from dashboards and access instances of the data center's database without any other authentication stage. All they needed was just the password. The second solution is for data at rest. We want to analyze enforcing AES 256 over AES 128 type of encryption. This increases the number of bits used as a key from 128 to 256 bits. Encryptions like AES 128 are still widely used by multiple data centers like Apple with their iCloud service. AES 128 is said to be an issue when it will come to quantum computers because their secret key will be faster to crack using a quantum algorithm, like one of them is called Shor's. It's a quantum algorithm that can crack this sort of encryption. The third solution is for data in transition. So like, let's say between you and the data center. We want to analyze quantum key distribution. This uses physics instead of math to establish a key. Quantum key distribution uses basically photons with different filters between the sender and the receiver to establish a secret key. This method can't be cracked by any quantum computer since it uses physics and not math. If an eavesdropper, let's say, is present and wants to intercept the key sharing between you and the sender and the receiver, well, at the end, the sender and the receiver will know by the photon's position that an eavesdropper was present, and they can just restart sending the keys from scratch. So it makes even eavesdropping next to impossible. These facts about quantum key distribution make it a perfect candidate to be analyzed.
So we decided to do a literature review. Here are some of the papers we're planning to examine. These papers go into details of hardware and software attacks, such as fiber cuts, floods, power attacks, terrorist attacks, and so much more. And we'll look into their solutions in there as well. And topics will include server security, network security, firewall security, cloud security, and a lot more. Next.
Okay, guys. So for our plan, as I'm sure everyone here is aware of and has kind of felt the crunch of, it being summer means we have a little bit less time to plan out and ultimately finish our project. So here we have the plan laid out that we feel strikes a comfortable balance between, workload and preserving our brain cells so that the project doesn't really suffer. By week 5, we should be able to submit our project. And until then, we want to write up our first draft, and write a final report and make a presentation, and a week between those steps should give us enough time to kind of thoroughly do the research that we need to do. Next, we want to talk about our focus areas. We've chosen these 3 as our focus areas. Anna is going to be talking about big data development, which will be like how big data has sort of is being structured, and I'm going to be talking about the security layers behind it, which will be how that data is being protected, obviously. And then Mina will specifically be going into quantum key distribution. We feel that's an especially important aspect of security in big data because it kind of reflects like the advance of time and how hackers, they're becoming more sophisticated as time goes on, but there are people who are sort of combating that flow, so yeah, that's what we wanted to focus on for our project. We feel that it gives us a nice well-rounded look at the whole thing. So next.
So to conclude this proposal, our goal, as previously mentioned, is to work on a literature review. The expected outcome would be to analyze different ways to increase and improve security in data centers, also to analyze ways to counter the threat of quantum computers when it comes to encryption and security. With that being said, my team and I would like to thank you for attention, and here are some references that we used, and we can head into the Q&A.
Thank you, guys.
So I have a quick question. You guys mentioned the quantum key distribution. It sounds expensive. So have you come across anything that reveals how much it would cost for the companies to implement that to secure their data and the data transfer? Or is this more of a question geared towards your final presentation?
So when I researched quantum key distribution, we did not see anything that mentioned cost. I think one of the many factors, like one of the reasons it wasn't mentioned is it's kind of a new concept that needs to be implemented soon. And it wasn't really researched previously when it comes to the implementation. The concept of it was researched, but the implementation wasn't really. Now they're trying to use it with fiber optics on smaller distances, but they did not mention any cost related to it. So it could be something we could definitely look into when it comes to the final presentation of this, like the cost of implementing it.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I have a question.
Sorry. Well, I just wanted to throw in that I mean, in the history of computing, the big sort of limiter to the speed at which technology was developed was cost. So like you look back at back when the first computers were being made, which were like the size of this bedroom. The reason that the common person really didn't have access to those kind of things is because it was prohibitively expensive. But new technologies were being developed that allowed that that size and that cost especially to come down. So I think it's just another one of those cases where it'll get cheaper as time goes on, and I think that's going to be where all the innovation really comes from. But this is just speculation. That's going to be something that we'll definitely cover more for the final.
Cool. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt you earlier, Kyle. It was just something that you guys had brought up in like a couple slides in your presentation and proposal. So as I mentioned, I will be covering like methods related to cyber attacks, but mine for the fossil fuel industry, but it would be the same idea like in a different sector of modern society. You guys did mention all these methods. Would your research like explore motives and or root causes to these attacks, or do you just plan to focus strictly on like the types of attacks themselves?
I was thinking we're mostly focused on the attacks and then there are solutions to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Great job.
Thank you.
Last up, I think, is Net Liberty, right?
I think so. That one, that screen, that's screen one. Oh, screen one. Not this one, this one. You want screen one? No, you want, no. You want screen one? No. Can you guys see our screen okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, looks
Great.
good.
Let me be sure we have the right one. Okay, we're 2-in-1 video. I don't know how this is going to work. We're just doing it by the seat of our pants the way everyone else is. So David and Levi Zima here from Team Net Liberty. And so our research proposal is on the reduction and elimination of data mining and censorship in public networks. So there's a saying in RF microwave engineering, and we say that it is always darkest before it's pitch black. And our message and research effort is twofold. Firstly, the consequences of the loss of privacy is worse than you think. And secondly, there is a lot we can do as engineers to push back against those who would not let us have network liberty and privacy. So networking, both private and public, both wired and wireless, is ubiquitous in the 21st century. The use of networks has moved from one of convenience and utility to one of necessity in daily life.
Products with Internet of Things capabilities is no longer the exception, it is the norm. IoT technology is not only opens up numerous new product categories of electronic devices, but opens new ways for data acquisition and control from private individuals. Networks are growing by the minute in every area of our lives. Moore's law predicts that there will soon be over 100 billion devices that can listen, track, and spy on you 24 hours a day.
Larceny or theft of property is not less of a crime if intellectual property is taken instead of real property. Stalking is no better if it's done electronically rather than in person. And interference with someone's liberty is not less of a crime if speech is inhibited rather than bodily movement. Although the data on networks are not physical, but rather ethereal entities and channels for communication and commerce, there is, however, a type of larceny, stalking, and false imprisonment that exist with contemporary networks. We call them data mining, surveillance, and censorship.
Whether our physical property is taken or our intellectual property, both acts are theft, if not with consent. Whether someone physically stalks us or we are stalked by electronic means, it can have the same detrimental effect on the person. Whether someone encumbers our physical movement or the flow of our thoughts and ideas online, it is oppressive. Data mining is the process of extracting and discovering patterns of thoughts and behaviors in an individual in order to determine future actions. What is mined can be sold to several interested parties for profit and gain, including that of corporations and governments.
China is leading the world in this regard, where almost every aspect of life is surveilled and monitored. History has shown that the end of free and unfettered communication often is the beginning of autocracy and tyranny. Censorship in Nazi Germany was extreme and strictly enforced by the governing Nazi party, but specifically by Joseph Goebbels. You can see here to your, I believe, your left, and his Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. The Bolsheviks seized power in Russia in 1917 while championing freedom, yet one of their first decisions was to limit free speech through harsh censorship. In early November 1917, the Soviet government signed the Decree on Press, which prohibited publishing any bourgeois articles criticizing the Bolshevik authority.
Whether it is governmental or corporate interference, people are becoming more and more aware of the loss of their freedom of speech in public networks. Some say we already live in a surveillance state, as we must consent to existing technologies' use terms because we are in no position to negotiate with private companies or our own governmental intelligence agencies for different terms. And there are no alternatives. We are asking the question, what are the alternatives?
Ayn Rand, the author of Atlas Shrugged in 1957, a novel on objectivistic theory on those who possess the greatest value to society, argued that it was engineers and entrepreneurs who were the most responsible for keeping the modern world running. She called engineers and entrepreneurs the motor of the world. So sorry, wrong type of engineer. This is not the one I was thinking of, but it's a joke that very few people get. I thought I'd try. So with all the nerdy imperfections and lack of polish we have as engineers and all the flack we get, we are indeed the motor of the world.
We at Team Net Liberty would like to embark on a research effort.
The world works the way it does because of us. Engineers conceived, designed, and built the existing system with all of its flaws. We can design retroactive fixes for the existing networks or design alternatives to the present networks offered. The networks, present and future, are in our hands to do what we want. The subject of this research effort is to find, verify, and share viable alternatives that provide privacy and freedom from current public network and social media providers that take our information and limit what we can hear and say.
There are alternatives to wholesale surrender of privacy in the form of smartphone apps. Parallel space will be under consideration in our research efforts. Virtual Exposed is another app that we will be exploring. And with this app and these apps, similar to Parallel Space, they protect the user privacy by making the user invisible to the certain apps that are opened inside these. And this app will be used to, or both the Virtual Exposed and the previous app will be explored to see what we can do in privacy on the platforms of smartphones and some other uses such as that.
An alternative to invisible apps is Linux-based phones, which are open source and in some cases provide hardware switches which give the user complete control over the hardware that is active. Another alternative to help guard against corporate and governmental overreach of liberty are RAIN networks. And the acronym stands for Redundant, Autonomous, Independent Networking. Now, Laura, as you can see here, is a strong contender that will be considered in our study as well. The range that Laura has point to point is up to 20 miles. And some countries like Holland have networked their entire country, their entire infrastructure with redundant networks that are private and very robust and immune to some degree to any intrusion by third parties to monitoring surveillance. Freedom to give and receive information without being molested by corporations, governments, or hackers is what we're trying to address. And that is the ultimate outcome we look for.
I will be researching smartphone privacy and de-Googling for platform privacy.
My part will be researching RAIN type networks and their associated hardware. We didn't provide a timeline goal chart as we have completed most of our final presentation and we are close to completing our research right now. So there is a cost for net liberty. It may be as little as the sacrifice of some simple conveniences, the use of alternative existing technologies, and the creation of some new ones. And these are the references that we have so far. So we'd be happy to, Levi and I'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Off the bat, are you guys doing a research project or a literature review?
As I said in the first slide,
Sorry, I
both
missed.
doing, oh, that's okay, that's okay. Yeah, we're doing a research project.
Okay, that's
and
fine.
we're actually researching all the three general areas we outlined. One being using existing apps that you can install on Apple or Android phones to help insulate yourself from some of the surveillance and tracking that you guys already talked about. And the other one is, of course, there's some hardware offerings. They're very expensive and they're very rare, but Linux phones that have hardware switches where you can turn on and off your GPS, your near field communication, Wi-Fi, your Bluetooth, and even your LT, your cellular radio.
Huh.
And lastly, we're actually going to show you, when we're done, we're going to show you how you can create your own network. You can create your own hub, and you can build your own redundant networks that use encryption, chirp spread spectrum, and would be autonomous.
All right, cool. I'm very interested in seeing how you guys' final project goes. I feel like there was a gradual slide at the beginning of our presentations that was like, hey, some people know about your data information, and then ours was like, people sell it, and then yours is like, don't sell your information. I'm really liking the general trend.
So I think if we synthesize all of our presentations into one, we got it all figured out.
I think so. I like it a lot.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Okay.
So one thing I was wondering, like as far as the privacy apps you guys were talking about and things of that sort, how can a user be sure that the app they're using or whatever it is that they're utilizing to keep their information safe, how are they sure that that's truly protecting their privacy and keeping them quote unquote invisible from outsiders?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And in some cases you can't be, and I'll tell you with Apple, it's really hard to know. A colleague of mine, as you guys know, I'm the old guy in the class. I'm older than the rest of you. I've been doing this a long time. And one of my colleagues used to be a consultant for the NSA. And he looked at some of the hardware in Apple, some of the early Apple phones, and he was pretty sure that they really have built-in backdoors for surveillance, so they can really pretty much take anyone or give access to the government, anything they want from your Apple phone. So the hardware really can limit what any app can do in terms of privacy. So unless you, and of course, the hardware, Apple hardware is highly proprietary and highly secret. So you really can't know with some phones, or it's like an Apple. A Linux system with open source, although it's not 100% guaranteed, the probability of being surveilled in a way you're unaware of with an open source, both open source hardware, where you actually know the hardware design and what's there, and open source firmware and open source software, the degree of certainty goes up, if that makes sense. Did you have anything?
Yeah, so involving those apps, they aren't ideal, but they do offer some extra protection and privacy. The most ideal system would be completely de-Googling, which also will be portion of our research project, where you completely rip out the operating systems from these phones and put in your own operating systems that allow you to control what information goes out of the phone and what information comes back in. All those apps tend to do is offer more anonymity to the user of those phones. So like virtual expose and some of those different apps, they just offer a little more anonymity. Although they aren't perfect. The more ideal system would be either to have a Linux phone where you have hardware switches you can turn off, or it'd be a completely de-Googled phone where you just put a whole new operating system in it that allows you to control what information enters your phone and what information leaves it.
Well, one last point to your question, Sierra. The way we found out about these apps when we were doing some of our initial research was, I have a colleague who's the principal software engineer at one of the biggest game companies in the world. His job is security, so that when you install an app on the phone, that a hacker can't get in the game and get into anything proprietary or reverse engineer anything. And they found out what hackers were doing was using these apps, the two we mentioned, in order to install their games inside of these apps, which created kind of a shell from the operating system that was trying to protect it. So it isolated the game app so that the hacker could get to it. And that's how we learned the value of privacy and using these apps for the common use, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you for the question.
I also had a question. I know in our time here, we've talked a lot about more recent events like the Ukraine conflict, where it's like multiple nations being involved. I just wanted to ask the question if, like, in your report, is there going to be like the inclusion of sort of like foreign powers in the like in our internet today?
Great question, Kyle. And the answer is absolutely. Matter of fact, I was going to cover that, but it was too much time in our preliminary. So North Korea, as you can imagine, is not a free liberty state. You can't say whatever you want, North Korea. So in North Korea, we became aware through some of our research that there was an app being used called FireChat. And FireChat takes a phone and it uses the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth radios to create autonomous ad hoc networks between phones with encrypted communication, so that the third party, the government, whoever, can't easily find out who's talking to whom. And so we were going to use North Korea as one of the examples of how you can use certain apps to have more net liberty, net privacy. But here's the bad part about FireChat. Guess who bought it? Google. So Google now owns FireChat, and now I think it was removed from the App Store. So you can't use it with Android or with Apple, and the North Koreans no longer have this tool for their own safety and protection. So there are other apps, though, besides FireChat, but those sort of apps are used all the time in foreign countries, like in Ukraine, in North Korea, and other countries.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
With the technology of like the parallel spacing thing you guys were talking about, is there any disadvantages of using it?
I'm sorry, your question was there risk in using parallel space?
Yeah, risk or disadvantages or anything associated?
Yeah, that's something that we're still digging into. All of the research we have so far, Levi, would you say it's favorable?
Yes.
But as far as liability, that's a really good question, Anna. And I'm not, we're not 100% sure. But as engineers, we know nothing is 100% certain, right? There's always a workaround. There's always, the first rule of engineering, any system is only as secure as its weakest point. And hackers are very good at finding out what that weakest point is. In the 1990s, I was invited to, as an engineer, to learn about a new type of encryption called keylock, which is used in all car remotes. And they presented it, and it took a 1,000-hour brute force attack to undo it. It took me 10 seconds to figure out a workaround in a meeting in front of 50 other engineers. And so engineers it's our nature to be hackers, right? We're always looking for an innovation, and that's kind of what we do. It's just in the way we're wired. So as long as there's bad actors that are engineers, there's always going to be some liability in anything we design.
And going back to something about the hardware switches being obsolete, to tell you the truth, hardware switches are the only thing that a computer can't control. If you have a switch where you just open it where it's completely off the network when you're not using it, that's honestly the best protection you could give yourself.
Yeah, I think you guys are all familiar with air gapping. But I think we're probably close to maybe being 5 minutes for Q&A. Were there any last questions? Great, thanks for your attention. We appreciate it very much.
Very nice. I believe that's everyone. Were we informed of what we should do past here, or is it kind of a scatter thing?
I don't think
know-
sorry, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think at one point we have to upload our recordings to YouTube. And I don't know. I don't know if the trigger is when we leave the room, if that happens, or if we need to leave the room, go, and maybe we get instructions from the professor to find out what's next.
I think it like drops a file on your desktop of the recording or something, and maybe you need to
Okay.
upload that. I don't know. I haven't done it, but I think that's what I've heard from previous stuff like this. But I definitely ask. But for the rest of us, I think, should we? I don't know if we like go back to the main room or not. You know.
Do you
I
want
think we check the main room first.
Yeah, should we check the main room to ask?
I think we should. Yeah.
Great. Does anyone want to go, or I can go and come back?
Check it out.
She muted.
Hey, all around good presentations, guys. That was good. I liked it. Very informative. I'm not gonna lie, I did like the phone presentation the most, like the one with the Apple phone. Y'all up first. That was very creative. I like that.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
You guys had really cool like slides too.
Thank you.
I wish I put more effort into my transition.
So how's everyone looking forward to that 4th of July break? It'll be nice. It's been a while since we've had a 3-day weekend.
I don't know about y'all. I'm working.
Me too, I'm working.
Hey guys, we just talked to the professor. He said you all can leave. We're all good. And if I think it was 3 of us that recorded, we just have to be sure to upload the recordings. That's all he said.
All right, sounds good.
Great. Good job, guys. Have a good evening. Bye now.
You too.
Yeah, thank you.